Book 4, Chapter 3 of History of the Reformation in the 16th Century, Volume 1, by Jean-Henri Merle, translated by Henry Beveridge. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3 Schwarzerd, his wife, Philip Melancthon, his genius, his studies, call to Wittenberg, Leipzig, parallel between Luther and Melancthon, education. The letter and brief had not reached Germany, and Luther was still fearing that he would be obliged to appear at Rome, when a happy event gave comfort to his heart. He needed a friend to whom he could unbosom his sorrows, and whose faithful love would solace him in his hours of depression. All this God gave him in Melancthon. On the 14th of February, 1497, George Schwarzerd, a skilful armour-bearer of Bretten, a small town in the Palatinate, had a son born to him, who was named Philip, and who afterwards distinguished himself under the name of Melancthon. Patronized by the Palatine princes and those of Bavaria and Saxony, George was a man of unimpeachable integrity. He often refused the price which purchasers offered him, and on learning that they were poor, insisted on returning their money. He rose regularly at midnight, and on his knees offered up a prayer. If on any occasion morning arrived without his having done it, he felt dissatisfied with himself the whole day. Barbara, Schwarzerd's wife, was daughter of an honourable magistrate named John Reuter. She was of a gentle temper, somewhat inclined to superstition, but otherwise remarkable for wisdom and prudence. From her we have the old well-known German rhymes: "The giving of alms impoverisheth not, attendance at church impedeth not, greasing the wheel retardeth not, ill-gotten gear enricheth not, the book of God deceiveth not." And again, those who are pleased more to expend than their fields can render, must come to ruin in the end, it may be to a halter. Young Philip was not 11 when his father died. 2 days before, George called his son to his bedside, and exhorted him to have the thought of God always present. "I foresee," said the dying armourer, "that dreadful storms are coming to shake the world. I have seen great things, but greater are in preparation. May God guide and direct you." Philip, after receiving his father's blessing, was sent to Spires, that he might not be present at his death. He departed, crying bitterly. The young boy's grandfather, the worthy baillie Reuter, who also had a son, acted as father to him, and took him, together with his brother George, under his own roof. Shortly after, he gave the 3 boys for tutor John Hungarus, an excellent man, who afterwards, and at a very advanced age, became a powerful preacher of the gospel. He let nothing pass in the young man, punishing him for every fault, yet with discretion. "In this way," says Melancthon in 1554, "he made me a grammarian. He loved me as a son. I loved him as a father, and we will meet, I trust, in eternal life." Philip was remarkable for the excellence of his understanding, and for his facility in learning, and expounding what he had learned. He could not endure idleness, and always sought out some one with whom he might discuss what he had heard. It often happened that educated strangers passed through Bretten, and visited Reuter. The bailie's grandson instantly accosted them, entered into conversation with them, and so pressed them in discussion as to excite the wonder of those present. To a powerful genius he joined great sweetness of temper, and was hence a general favourite. He had a stammer, but, like the celebrated orator of the Greeks, made such exertions to overcome it, that it afterwards completely disappeared. His grandfather having died, Philip was sent with his brother and his young uncle John to the school of Pforzheim. The boys resided with one of their relatives, the sister of the famous Reuchlin. Eager for knowledge, Philip, under the tuition of George Simler, made rapid progress in science, and especially in the study of Greek, for which he had a real passion. Reuchlin often came to Pforzheim, and having become acquainted with his sister's young boarders, was soon struck with Philip's answers, and gave him a Greek grammar and a Bible. These two books were to be the study of his whole life. When Reuchlin returned from his second journey into Italy, his young relative, then 12 years of age, with some friends, performed a Latin comedy of his own composition before him, in honour of his arrival. Reuchlin, in raptures with the talent of the youth, embraced him tenderly, called him his dear son, and jocularly gave him the red bonnet which he had received on being made a doctor. It was at this time Reuchlin changed his name of Schwarzerd into that of Melancthon. Both words, the one German and the other Greek, mean black earth. It was a general custom with the learned thus to change their names into Greek or Latin. Melancthon, at 12, repaired to the University of Heidelberg, and began to gratify his eager thirst for knowledge. He was admitted bachelor at 14. In 1512 Reuchlin invited him to Tübingen, which contained a great number of distinguished literary men. Here he attended at the same time lectures on theology, medicine, and jurisprudence. There was no branch of knowledge which he did not think it his duty to study. His object was not praise, but the possession of science and the benefits of it. The Holy Scriptures particularly occupied him. Those who frequented the church of Tübingen had often observed a book in his hands, which he studied between the services. This unknown volume seemed larger than the common prayer books, and the report spread that Philip, when in church, read profane books. It turned out that the object of their suspicion was a copy of the Holy Scriptures, printed a short time before at Bâle by John Frobenius. This volume he studied through life with unwearied application. He had it always with him, carrying it to all the public meetings to which he was invited. Rejecting the vain system of the schoolmen, he devoted himself to the simple word of the gospel. Erasmus at this time wrote to Œcolampadius, "Of Melancthon I have the highest opinion and the highest hopes. Jesus grant that this young man may have a long life. He will completely eclipse Erasmus." Melancthon, nevertheless, shared in the errors of his age. "I shudder," says he, in advanced life, "when I think of the honour which I paid to images when I was still in the papacy." In 1514 he was made doctor in philosophy, and began to teach. His age was 17. The grace and attractiveness which he gave to his lectures formed a striking contrast to the insipid method which the doctors, and especially the monks, had hitherto pursued. He took an active part in the combat in which Reuchlin was engaged with the obscurants of his age. His agreeable conversation, his gentle and elegant manners, gaining him the love of all who knew him, he soon acquired great authority and a solid reputation in the world. At this time, the Elector Frederick, having conceived the idea of inviting some distinguished professor of ancient languages to his University of Wittemberg, applied to Reuchlin, who suggested Melancthon. Frederick saw all the lustre which this young Hellenist might shed on an institution which was so dear to him; and Reuchlin, delighted at seeing so fine a field opened to his young friend, addressed him in the words of Jehovah to Abraham: "Come out from thy country, and thy kindred, and thy father's house, and I will render thy name great, and thou shalt be blessed." "Yes," continues the old man, "I hope it will be so with thee, my dear Philip, my work and my comfort." In this invitation Melancthon saw a call from God. The university was grieved to part with him, and yet he was not without envious rivals and enemies. He left his native country, exclaiming, "The will of the Lord be done." He was then 21 years of age. Melancthon made the journey on horseback, in company with some Saxon merchants, in the same way in which caravans travel in the desert; for, says Reuchlin, he knew neither the towns nor the roads. At Augsburg he did homage to the Elector, who happened to be there. At Nuremberg he saw the excellent Pirckheimer, whom he already knew, and at Leipsic formed an intimacy with the learned Hellenist Mosellanus. In this last town the university gave a fête in honour of him. It was a truly academic repast. The dishes were numerous, and as each made its appearance, a professor rose and addressed Melancthon in a Latin discourse previously prepared. He immediately gave an extempore reply. At length, worn out with so much eloquence, "Most illustrious friends," said he, "allow me to reply once for all to your addresses; for, not being prepared, I cannot put as much variety into my replies as you into your addresses." Thereafter the dishes arrived without the accompaniment of a discourse. Reuchlin's young relative arrived at Wittemberg, 25th of August, 1518, 2 days after Leo X had signed the brief addressed to Cajetan, and the letter to the Elector. The professors of Wittemberg did not receive Melancthon with so much favour as those of Leipsic had done. The first impression which he made upon them did not correspond to their expectations. They saw a young man, who seemed still younger than he really was, of small stature, and a feeble, timid air. Is this the illustrious doctor whom the greatest men of the age, Erasmus and Reuchlin, extol so loudly? Neither Luther, with whom he first was made acquainted, nor his colleagues, conceived high hopes of him, when they saw his youth, his embarrassment, and his whole appearance. 4 days after his arrival, 29th of August, he delivered his inaugural address. The whole university was assembled. The boy, as Luther called him, spoke such elegant Latin, and displayed so much knowledge, a mind so cultivated, and a judgment so sound, that all his hearers were filled with admiration. At the termination of the address, all pressed forward to congratulate him, but none felt more joy than Luther, who hastened to communicate to his friends the feelings with which his heart was overflowing. Writing to Spalatin, 31st of August, he says, "Melancthon, 4 days after his arrival, delivered an address so beautiful and so learned, that it was listened to with universal approbation and astonishment. We have soon got the better of the prejudices which his stature and personal appearance had produced. We praise and admire his eloquence. We thank the prince and you for the service you have done us. I ask no other Greek master. But I fear that his delicate body will not be able to digest our food, and that, on account of the smallness of his salary, we shall not keep him long. I hear that the Leipsic folks are already boasting of being able to carry him off from us. O my dear Spalatin, beware of despising his age and personal appearance. He is a man worthy of all honour." Melancthon immediately began to explain Homer, and St. Paul's epistle to Titus. He was full of ardour. "I will do my utmost," wrote he to Spalatin, "to bring Wittemberg into favour with all who love literature and virtue." 4 days after the inauguration, Luther again wrote to Spalatin, "I recommend to you most particularly the very learned and very amiable Greek, Philip. His class room is always full. All the theologians in particular attend him. He sets all classes, from the highest to the lowest, to the learning of Greek." Melancthon was able to return the affection of Luther, in whom he soon discovered a goodness of heart, a strength of intellect, a courage, and a wisdom, which he had not previously found in any man. He venerated and loved him. "If there is any one," said he, "whom I love strongly, and whom my whole soul embraces, it is Martin Luther." Thus met Luther and Melancthon, and they were friends till death. We cannot sufficiently admire the goodness and wisdom of God in uniting 2 men so different, and yet so necessary to each other. What Luther had in warmth, elasticity, and force, Melancthon had in perspicuity, wisdom, and gentleness. Luther animated Melancthon. Melancthon moderated Luther. They were like the two forms of electric matter, the positive and the negative, which modify each other. Had Luther been without Melancthon, the stream had perhaps overflowed its bank, and, on the other hand, Melancthon, when without Luther, hesitated and even yielded when he ought to have stood firm. Luther did much by vigour, and Melancthon perhaps did not less, by pursuing a slower and calmer course. Both were upright, open, and generous, and both, smitten with the love of the word of eternal life, served it with a fidelity and devotedness which formed the distinguishing feature of their lives. The arrival of Melancthon produced a revolution, not only at Wittemberg, but throughout Germany and the learned world. His study of the Greek and Latin classics, and of philosophy, had given him an order, perspicuity, and precision of thought, which shed new light and inexpressible beauty on all the subjects which he discussed. The mild spirit of the gospel fertilized and enlivened his meditations, and the driest subjects, when he expounded them, were invested with a grace which fascinated all his hearers. The sterility which scholasticism had spread over education ceased, and a new mode of instruction and study commenced. Thanks to Melancthon, says a distinguished German historian, Wittemberg became the national school. It was, indeed, of great importance that a man thoroughly versed in Greek should teach in this university, where the new developments of theology called masters and scholars to study the primitive documents of the Christian faith in the original languages. Thenceforth Luther set himself zealously to this task. Often did the meaning of a Greek term, which had previously been unknown to him, throw sudden light on his theological views. For example, how great his satisfaction and delight when he saw that the Greek word metanoia, which, according to the Latin Church, meant a penance, a satisfaction enacted by the Church, meant in Greek a transformation or conversion of heart. A thick mist all at once disappeared from before his eyes. The two meanings given to this word are sufficient to characterize the two churches. The impulse which Melancthon gave to Luther in regard to the translation of the Bible is one of the most remarkable circumstances in the friendship of these two great men. As early as 1517, Luther had made some attempts at translation, and procured as many Greek and Latin books as he could. Now, aided by his dear Philip, his task received a new impetus. Luther obliged Melancthon to take part in his researches by consulting him on difficult passages, and the work, destined to be one of the greatest works of the Reformer, advanced more surely and more rapidly. Melancthon, on his part, became acquainted with a new theology. The beautiful and profound doctrine of justification by faith filled him with astonishment and joy. Still, in receiving the system Luther professed, he acted independently, moulding it according to the particular form of his own intellect; for although he was only 21 years of age, he was one of those precocious minds which enter early into possession of all their powers, and are themselves from the very outset. The zeal of the masters was soon transfused into the scholars. It was proposed to reform the course of study. With the concurrence of the Elector, certain branches, only of scholastic importance, were suppressed, and at the same time a new impulse was given to classic pursuits. The school of Wittemberg underwent a transformation, and the contrast between it and other universities became still more prominent. Still, however, the landmarks of the Church were observed, though all felt that they were on the eve of a great battle with the Pope. End of Book 4, Chapter 3.